There with the vaccine rolling out in the United States, businesses are slowly reopening and expanding capacity, and consumption as a result is booming as everything slowly gets back to normal. But there was a jobs report this month, and the top line numbers were a little disappointing to most analysts, and this has led to a flurry of media discussing the so-called labor shortage.
All right, we're back now with another blow to businesses due to the pandemic. Restaurants are now dealing with staffing shortages right as they were hoping to start recovering some of their big losses. ABC's Deirdre Bolton has been looking into it.
This morning, some restaurant owners say their customers are back, and it's like turning on a light switch.
We have more business than we can handle.
It sounds like a humble brag, but it's a business problem. As life returns to normal, not all workers are returning to their old jobs.
My entire career, I've never seen it this difficult to find people to work in the restaurants.
Oh no! Well, what is causing this? Well, we can turn to an incredible YouTube channel that I found, which is basically just a guy who runs a landscaping business talking about all things related to the landscaping business. He interviewed a fellow landscaping business owner about the crisis.
What's up, dog? We got the young hustler. He's back. He's not 15 anymore. Now he's 36. How old are you?
19.
He's 19 now. He's crushing it. Look at his nice truck. He called me out. You got a lawn care and landscape business, but those trees behind us, you need a quote for those. So anyways, I was just talking to him about the employee issue. And what were you saying, bro, this year, 2021?
So our lowest paid guy right now is mid-16s making per hour. And there's just no one that wants to work anymore, I guess, right? I mean, we're staying optimistic on the whole situation. But this whole unemployment thing right now, it's really not helping us at all, because I have guys that bust their ass and work 50 hours a week that are still making less than someone sitting at home that are capable to work. And a big thing with it is, we have some really good guys, and we try to come to them, hey, we'll give you an incentive to get some more employees over here. And what they say is they say, yeah, they can come back when these benefits end, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. I mean, have some pride, get back to work, right?
That kid, by the way, is 19 and has been an owner of a landscaping business since he was 12. But, that YouTube channel, by the way, gets way more views than you would think. It's like a lot of views. So anyway, there you have it. It's too generous unemployment benefits are to blame. The government is giving people money so they don't want to go back to work. Anyway, it's not just guys on the street who are saying it. Republicans like Marco Rubio are also worried about the specter that is haunting the United States, the specter of generous unemployment benefits.
Everywhere I went, as I interacted with small businesses, we did a lot of focus on recipients of PPP and how the program had helped them. Everywhere I went, I heard the same thing from people that didn't know each other. There's no way that they coordinated on this message. And it's went something like this. We have 50 job openings. We can only get 5 people to even respond. Only one will come in for an interview, and then they didn't take the job when I offered it. Over and over and over again, hearing that from small businesses in various sectors, so not just restaurants and hotels and hospitality, but various other sectors as well, including one manufacturer. And when I asked, well, why is it? Why are people telling you that they're not going to do it? And the answer that people gave them was, look, I'm receiving unemployment benefits. It pays maybe not as much as I was making working, but pretty close. When those run out, I'm going to go back to work. That's what we're being told by small businesses. It's not what I'm saying. I'm not having a press conference here with you today to tell you that's what I believe. It's what I'm being told. So I'm here to tell you what small businesses are telling me, and I believe are telling everyone that's here. And that is that enhanced unemployment benefits are creating an incentive for people not to return to work until they expire. It's not because people are lazy, right? Accusing anyone of being lazy. It's because people are logical. Because it's logic that if you're going to make close to what, or as much, in some cases more than what you do when you're at work, you'll go back to work when that expires. We have a labor crisis in this country.
Oh, dear God, Marco Rubio, we have a labor crisis in this country. People just don't want to work for the meager wages that these business owners want to pay them. No one asked Marco Rubio about the money earned by the CEOs during the pandemic, which somehow went up.
So you have some reporting specifically on how CEOs fared financially during the pandemic. as so many Americans faced financial fallout. Talk to us about the CEO paychecks and why they often personally did not take a hit like many of their profit margins did.
Yes, CEO paychecks generally went up last year, even in industries like cruise lines and hotels and restaurants that were hurt the worst by the coronavirus pandemic. And the reason is that what I found in my reporting was that the watchdogs, the corporate boards that are supposed to decide what these CEOs get paid and what's fair, they didn't really do their job last year. They made excuses. We had found the instance of Yum Brands saying that, well, it was unfair for their CEO's paycheck to go down just because of the pandemic. Well, there was a lot that was unfair about the pandemic. That's what critics told us. And the workers didn't cause the pandemic either, and yet many of them lost their jobs.
Yeah, in fact, a report put out by the Institute for Policy Studies this week showed that not only did CEO pays rise dramatically during the pandemic, often companies rigged their own rules in order to pay their CEOs more while at the same time paying their employees less. And this wasn't just companies that employ high earners like, say, hedge funds. It was the CEOs of companies that employ low-wage earners. Here's the report. The top line findings are that during the pandemic, more than half of the country's 100 largest low-wage employers rigged pay rules to give CEOs 29% average raises, while their frontline employees made 2% less. Of the 100 S&P 500 firms with the lowest median worker wages, 51 bent their own rules in 2020 to pump up executive paychecks. Common manipulations included lowering performance bars to help executives meet bonus targets, awarding special retention bonuses, excluding poor second quarter results from evaluations, and replacing performance-based pay with time-based awards. CEO compensation averaged $15.3 million, up 29% from 2019. Hilton CEO Christopher Nassetta pocketed the largest rigged pay package. Adjustments to his stock awards inflated the hotelier's total compensation to $55.9 million, 1,953 times as much as the company's median worker pay of $28,608. And after a year of inactivity, and with demand skyrocketing as vaccines roll out and people go out and consume, companies are sitting on a ton of cash. If they're so worried about a labor shortage, they could offer people more money to work for them. Are they doing that? No, they're using that cash to do stock buybacks at record levels.
Some U.S. stocks could get a boost from a wave of share buybacks. From January through to the end of April this year, U.S. companies have announced a record $484 billion in buybacks. The FT's U.S. equities correspondent, Aziza Kazumov, is covering this.
Yeah, so if you think about it, share buybacks cost companies a lot of money since, they have to go and buy back the shares at the market price with cash. And a year ago or so, companies really didn't know how bad and how long this crisis was going to be. So, under those circumstances, you really didn't want to be spending excess cash on something like your own shares. But in the last couple of months, those dynamics have changed with the vaccine rollout and cases trending down and the sort of reopening kicking into gear. So companies now are a lot more secure about their futures. They sort of know better what's coming down the pipeline. They have found themselves with a lot of cash on hand because, there's been all this pent-up demand and people have started spending a lot more in the first quarter. So companies are just in a lot better place, which is why a lot of them have started doing buybacks again.
Now, we don't have time to get into the ins and outs of stock buybacks, but the premise is pretty simple. The managers of a company decide to use cash to buy their own stock, which increases its price. And since the managers and the investors who oversee them own that stock, it boosts their own net worth. It's essentially managers sticking their hand in the cookie jar and taking some cookies for themselves. But back to the jobs report. Left policy wonk Matt Brunig crunched the numbers, and unsurprisingly, he found that the narrative was somewhat misleading. In a post over at the People's Policy Project, which he runs, he wrote, "On the employment side, we see that just under 6.5 million people newly found employment in March. In April, that number shot up to 6.9 million people who newly found employment. More job seekers are finding jobs than before, which is at odds with the idea that people who are out of work have become especially reluctant to come into work due to unemployment benefits or similar. This increase in new employment was, however, completely overwhelmed by the number of people who went from employed to unemployed and people who went from employed to not in the labor force, or NILF. The number of people moving into NILF status grew by an especially large amount. Importantly, NILFs are ineligible for unemployment benefits. And so this figure is also at odds with the idea that unemployment benefits are a major driver of recent labor market dynamics. Without access to CPS microdata, it's hard to say what is going on with the NILFs with much certainty. So generally, NILFs are people who are disabled, retired, in school, or taking care of children. It is hard to see how disability and school would have ticked up, which leaves taking care of children and retirement as the likely culprits for these labor market exits. And when he broke down the data, he found that the huge increase in NILFs, or people who dropped out of the labor force entirely, meaning they weren't seeking jobs, was almost entirely driven by women. The number of people moving from employment to unemployment was pretty much the same for both months for both genders. The main thing that stands out is the number of women moving out of employment and into NILF status increased by a large amount, from 1.8 million to over 2.5 million, while that same number actually decreased for men, from 2 million to 1.8 million. Insofar as dropping out of work to take care of kids is more typical of women than men, these figures suggest that taking care of kids is the primary reason why NILF status increased last month and the primary reason why net employment growth declined last month. So maybe we don't need to cut unemployment insurance. If we want workers to get back to work, we need to expand childcare assistance. But still, the media narrative has focused on unemployment as the culprit.
Talk to anyone who's in the South Florida restaurant business, and the conversation goes right to the issue of the difficulty hiring workers, cooks, waiters, you name it.
It's bad enough that businesses are limiting their capacity, reducing their operating hours, closing on days they're usually open because there's not enough staff to meet the needs of our guests.
Bottom line, many of the longtime restaurant workers can, in the short term, make more money living off unemployment and other state and federal subsidies during the pandemic.
It's desperate, Hank. We are competing with the federal unemployment. Some of our workers tell us they're making more money staying at home than returning to work.
The issue is not confined to South Florida. It is a nationwide dilemma for restaurant owners. In wide open Texas,
they went to construction site or some other jobs which pay more.
Same story in the Midwest. Indiana, for example, they can't find restaurant workers.
Hiring to secure new employees has been atrocious. There is a lot of individuals that are seeing some great benefits from unemployment, both state and then also for the first time ever, which we've seen in the last year, federal unemployment.
So what to do here in Florida? What's the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association advocating?
We asked Senator Scott and Senator Rosen to please note that the unemployment benefits need to be monitored. We need folks to come back to work.
Yeah. Now, again, Matt Brunig crunched the numbers. He writes, quote, "It is worth remembering that not all people who are out of work are even on unemployment benefits. As indicated in the graph above, in late April, there were 3.8 million people on unemployment benefits. In that same month, there were 151.1 million people employed, which was equal to an employment rate of 57.9%. Prior to the recession, the employment rate peaked at 61.1%. If that rate was obtained last month, the total number of employed people would have been 8.4 million people, higher at 159.5 million people. If we take this 8.4 million figure as the number of missing workers, we see that less than half of the missing workers are even on unemployment. But let's just say that it is true, that there may be some truth to the claim that the generous unemployment benefits doled out by both presidents, Trump and Biden, coupled with the one-time stimulus checks, have caused some people to reconsider whether they want to go back to a shitty restaurant job that pays below minimum wage because of tips, only to get abused by the twin tyrannies of spoiled customers and awful bosses. Now, would that be so bad? You see, the idea of a labor shortage is on the whole a good thing. It is very bad for business owners, but it is very good for workers. A labor shortage is what happens when you have something called full employment. In short, full employment is when the demand for labor is equal to the supply of labor. At that point, employers are forced to fight with each other to compete with workers because there is no pool of unemployed workers to pull from. So when employers compete, wages and benefits and all kinds of worker goodies rise. Full employment used to be a political rallying cry that was quite common, not so much these days, but it was in the Democratic Party platform in every election from 1944 to 1988. Here's the Democratic Party platform of 1948, for example. It writes, quote, "We reject the principle which we have always rejected, but which the Republican 80th Congress enthusiastically accepted, that government exists for the benefit of the privileged few, to serve the interests of all and not the few, to assure a world in which peace and justice can prevail, to achieve security, full production, and full employment. This is our platform." Now, in 1992, under the leadership of one Bill Clinton, full employment vanished from the platform. But real full employment is a worthy goal for the left. In 1943, the Polish economist Michael Kalecki wrote a famous essay on full employment in which he outlined how it can be achieved through government policy, but also its political effects. He wrote, quote, "The maintenance of full employment would cause social and political changes which would give a new impetus to the opposition of the business leaders. Indeed, under a regime of permanent full employment, the sack, or firing employees, would cease to play its role as a disciplinary measure. The social position of the boss would be undermined, and the self-assurance and class consciousness of the working class would grow. Strikes for wage increases and improvements in conditions of work would create political tension. It is true that profits would be higher under a regime of full employment than they are on average under laissez-faire, and even the rise in wage rates resulting from the stronger bargaining power of the workers is less likely to reduce profits than to increase prices, and thus adversely affects only the rentier interests. But discipline in the factories and political stability are more appreciated than profits by business leaders. Their class interest tells them that lasting full employment is unsound from their point of view, and that unemployment is an integral part of the normal capitalist system. Unemployment is an integral part of the normal capitalist system." So we're seeing all that play out. The fact that people don't want to work for the starvation wages that businesses are offering is forcing business to offer better wages and benefits.
For other owners, the lack of staff puts them personally in an unsustainable position. Erica Simino manages Columbo's, a popular restaurant on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. She says some of her competitors are trying to attract workers with extra money.
They are offering $17 an hour for dishwashers to start. Plus, if they retain them for 90 days, they get $1,000. These are incentives that this business has never seen before.
She says Columbo's owners are now adding a 401k program, which she describes as unheard of in the business.
A 401k program for dishwashers? Heavens, no. But if you're a small business owner watching this, don't worry. Joe Biden ain't going to let this go on for much longer.
We're going to make it clear that anyone collecting unemployment who is offered a suitable job must take the job or lose their unemployment benefits. There are a few COVID-19 related exceptions so that people aren't forced to choose between their basic safety and a paycheck. But otherwise, that's the law.
Now that is just pure 1990s style anti-welfare talk right there. Now, a worker who is unemployed and who is on an unemployment and chooses not to go back to a shitty job is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. But our system is wired in such a way that it needs to impoverish people in order to compel them to work in terrible jobs. We need to reject this framing altogether. Now, they're going to scare you by saying that the price of a Big Mac is going to go from $3.99 to $4.99 if businesses need to pay their workers more. They're also going to say that you may have to wait a little bit longer for your chocolate frosty at Wendy's if businesses can't find workers to work for starvation wages. Don't listen to them. The pandemic has caused dramatic changes in our lives. It's been really hard for the vast majority of people, but it also has opened up new political opportunities for a lot of the old conventional wisdom has been proven to be bullshit. Employers sweating to fill their job postings is framed as a bad thing by the media, but it is in fact very, very good. As Michael Kalecki wrote back in 1943, full employment capitalism will, of course, have to develop new social and political institutions which will reflect the increased power of the working class. If capitalism can adjust itself to full employment, a fundamental reform will have been incorporated in it. If not, it will show itself an outmoded system which must be scrapped.